Today's presenters include Diane Keneally. I am the Director of the Office of Integrated Modal Services here at the New York State Department of Transportation. Dawn Arnold, the Assistant Director for the Local Programs Bureau, will be assisting us monitoring chat and answering questions. Margaret Narens is one of our managers here in the Local Programs Bureau. Doreen Hulsapple, while not participating today, has been a member and helped prepare today's presentation. And Stephen Belkin, who is part of our TAP CMAQ team. He is located in our Region 10 Planning and Program Management Office and will also assist in today's presentation. Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of the first half of today's presentation. This is going to provide information about the 2021 TAP CMAQ program. We'll also cover project eligibility and eligible sponsors. We will review the evaluation criteria for each of the programs. We will explain how to apply for funding for these programs. We'll cover general federal aid requirements for any project that is awarded or selected. We'll provide you information on resources available to you in completing your application. We'll have a brief question and answer period on the first half of the presentation. We'll take a short 15-minute break, and then the remainder of the time will be covering Grants Gateway information, how to begin your application, complete the information, and submit your application. Today's presentation will last approximately 3 hours. The first portion, approximately an hour and a half, with our break, and then the remainder of the time for Grants Gateway. Today's program objectives. The TAP CMAQ programs support New York State climate goals and helps communities deliver safe, transformative, and innovative programs and projects that address the mobility and accessibility needs of all users and abilities. Reduce vehicle emissions and traffic congestion, revitalize local and regional economies, provide safe routes to schools, convert abandoned railway corridors to pedestrian trails, and meet requirements of the Clean Air Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are a number of sponsor requirements that we'll discuss now. Sponsors need to make sure that they demonstrate that the activity is related to surface transportation. The activity or proposed project must be open to the public. It cannot be exclusively recreational facility. You need to make sure that the sponsor has legal authority for use of the right-of-way for the particular project or activity. The project must conform with requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The sponsor will also be responsible to maintain and operate the project once it's completed. The sponsor is responsible for performing the design and oversight in compliance with all federal requirements. And the sponsor must assume financial obligations in excess of the amount awarded necessary to complete the project, including the 20% non-federal share of the project. The sponsor is also responsible to submit reimbursement requests and may not be reimbursed any of the expenses that are incurred prior to the execution of a state-local agreement. The sponsor must also provide a realistic schedule and budget that includes all phases and costs of the project. Specifically, for the CMAQ program, any activity must be located within a designated air quality, non-attainment, or maintenance area. For more information, please see the TAP CMAQ website. For those of you who are familiar with our previous transportation alternatives, congestion mitigation, and air quality improvement programs, what has changed since the last time we offered funding through these programs? Well, we've updated the evaluation criteria. We've revised it and streamlined the criteria. Also, we've increased the minimum federal award to $500,000. Also, in this round, we have an emphasis on investments in disadvantaged communities around the state. We've also expanded eligibility for environmental mitigation and community improvement activities. These are clearly articulated in our guidebook. All applications must be completed and submitted via Grants Gateway. This is the state's portal many solicitations by various agencies are using around the state. The funding available for these programs statewide is $110 million. The breakdown is $62 million for the Transportation Alternatives Program and $48 million for the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program. To be eligible for CMAQ funding, the project must be located in one of the 19 counties as noted in our guidebook on page 8 and Appendix C, specifically page C1. The minimum award amount for these programs will be $500,000. The maximum award amount will be $5 million. And just as a reminder, this is a reimbursement program. Sponsors must first instance all project costs, and reimbursement is up to 80% of the eligible costs. An applicant must provide the 20% match. These projects are not eligible to use Marcus-Ellis funds as part of the local match. Now we're going to review a few important dates with the funding opportunities. First, we're providing informational webinars on these programs today, July 14th, and on Tuesday, July 20th. So if you have others in your organization who would like to participate, we are having another live webinar next week. After the webinars have been completed, and we are recording this webinar today, the recording will be posted on the website. Another key date you should be aware of is Tuesday, August 17th, 2021. This is the deadline for applicants to submit a request for a pre-review of their application. This is an opportunity for you to have your project reviewed by our regional staff and for them to give you feedback on the project, perhaps your budget estimate, and use that information to improve your application. The final deadline for the submission of applications are Wednesday, September 29th, 2021 at 5 p.m. This is a hard deadline. No applications can be submitted after this date and time. Grants Gateway will not allow you to submit an application unless all required fields have been completed. We encourage you to get the application in early. Throughout the winter of 2021 and 2022, we will announce project awards. You will be contacted by your regional local project liaison to schedule kickoff meetings. The department will prepare state-local agreements for execution by local governments, the state controller. We will advance projects. Sponsors must advance projects to construction letting within 24 months of the execution of the state-local agreement. And it's very important for sponsors to submit timely reimbursement requests to make sure that the projects stay active. So let's talk a little bit about project eligibility. Every project must have an eligible sponsor. Every project must relate to surface transportation. Every project must meet the intent of the program, and qualify under one of the categories for TAP or CMAQ. Each project must benefit the public, and each project must have community support. So how does a project relate to surface transportation? Well, its proximity and connection to a highway or pedestrian bicycle corridor. Also, it can enhance the aesthetic, cultural, or historic aspects of the travel experience. And it could serve, it must serve a transportation purpose rather than primarily recreational. So eligible sponsors for today's programs include local governments. Those local governments can be counties, towns, cities, and villages. Sponsor may be a regional transportation authority, a transit agency. May also be a natural resource or public land agency, such as the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, or a local fish and game or wildlife agency. Also an eligible sponsor are tribal governments, local or regional governmental entities responsible for transportation or recreational trails. The New York State Department of Transportation is an eligible sponsor for CMAQ projects only. We'll cover a few sponsor responsibilities when advancing a project. When advancing a project, a sponsor must act as the primary project contact. The sponsor will manage the project. The sponsor needs to follow all federal aid requirements. The sponsor will enter into a state-local agreement with the New York State Department of Transportation. The sponsor will pay all project costs first. The project will submit reimbursement requests. The sponsor will maintain all infrastructure after the completed construction or implementation of the project. The sponsor will assume all financial obligations in excess of the amount awarded necessary to complete the project, including the 20% non-federal share. And the sponsor will maintain all project-related records, invoices for review and audit. And at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Stephen Belkin, and he will cover eligible TAP activities.
Eligible TAP activities. They focus on bicyclists, pedestrians, and non-driver or non-vehicular transportation benefits and amenities such as the design and construction of on-road and off-road pedestrian and bicycle facilities, projects for improving safety and access to public transportation that enhance mobility, turnouts, overlooks and viewing areas, conversion and use of abandoned railroad corridors for trails, and projects that make walking and bicycling to school a safe and routine activity, such as the Old Safe Routes to School. Specific requirements, the project selection process, and the TAP evaluation criteria are located in Appendix B of the guidebook. Next slide, please. All right, so for CMAQ, the eligible activities focus on emissions and congestion reduction. These include travel demand management or rideshare programs, congestion reduction and traffic flow improvements, transit improvements, including operating support. That could be operational support for new services only and for a limited period of time. Freight intermodal operational improvements, development of alternative fuel infrastructure and clean vehicle deployment projects, pedestrian and bicycle facilities. It must be, in order to apply for CMAQ, the sponsor must be eligible, as Diane explained before, and it must be within one of the eligible counties that can apply for CMAQ and must meet the evaluation criteria. All right, and so as I was stating before, the CMAQ projects, they should demonstrate, or they must demonstrate, an emissions benefit, such as the effect of the project on a number of vehicles, the vehicle miles traveled, the speeds, and the operating characteristics of the vehicle. The specific requirements, the project selection process, and the CMAQ rating criteria are all located in Appendix C of the guidebook. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So on this slide, there's a breakdown of different project categories, and you could see with the X for TAP and for CMAQ. A major decision point in the application process is determining the program to apply for, TAP, CMAQ, or both, and to decide on a project category. So this eligible project category chart is found in the guidebook and in Appendix E, and it'll help you make that decision. So based on the selected category, your project may qualify for either program or possibly both. Keep in mind that each program has its own eligibility and data requirements. You can apply for funding under both programs, but if that's the case, you must submit the data to meet the requirements for both of those particular programs. Your application at that point would then be evaluated twice, one under TAP and one under CMAQ. And so a detailed description of the TAP and CMAQ eligible categories, the guiding questions, examples of eligible and ineligible projects, specific requirements, project selection process, and rating criteria are in the guidebook appendices B, and C. Review the guidebook and appendices for specific details to best select your category. And like I said, while a project may fit into multiple categories, you should select the category that best describes the primary purpose of the project. And just be aware that the sponsor, entity type, and the project county may limit the categories available to choose from. So as you can see on this slide as well, this is just a continuation of those eligible project activities, which are included in Appendix B and C. So when you are ready to apply and you're going through the application, you can refer to them. So next slide, please. So the evaluation criteria that we'll be looking at will be the following, and just know that this is a competitive process, and so the applications will be reviewed based on criteria in the guidebook. The general categories for evaluation are the following: the project benefits, the project alignment, and essential project management elements. And just as a reminder, bonus points are provided for those applications that undergo a pre-review, as well as providing a letter from a New York State professional engineer indicating their review of the project. We do have a sample boilerplate letter that's provided, as well as instructions on the pre-review process. Some of the specifics of the criteria vary by program. And again, evaluation criteria for TAP can be found in Appendix B, and for CMAQ in Appendix C of the guidebook. We will now talk a bit about each program. So next slide. So for TAP, as you can see up on the screen, the three categories are essentially the same for both programs. TAP and CMAQ. However, some of the details vary. The most important component is the essential project management elements, which total 60 points. This includes schedule, the budget, right-of-way assurance, match assurance, which is at 80-20, and the ability to deliver the project. All the information you need for a successful application is included in the guidebook and the appendices, which I had indicated before. Make sure to include all the necessary information in your application so that it does score well. Next slide, please. And now this, if you look at the following slide, this is the evaluation criteria for CMAQ, and it's essentially the same as the TAP evaluation criteria with the essential project management elements that total 60 points. The biggest difference is that for CMAQ, you must demonstrate that the project has air quality benefits. The project's benefits section is a bit different. It looks at how well the project will reduce emissions and how well it improves air quality. And I'll say it again, the guidebook and the appendices include all the information you need for a successful application. So just please be sure to include all necessary information in your application so that it does, in fact, score well. All right, next slide. So now we will talk a bit about the criteria within each evaluation category. So first, under project benefits, you want to use the information provided on the application. The reviewers will be evaluating the project and award points based on the project benefits and proposed solutions, innovation, creativity, and improvements to safety. For reviewers to have a complete understanding of the project, the detailed project description should indicate the issues or opportunities being addressed, as the application will be scored based on that information that is provided. The project must benefit the public and have documented support from the community, especially those in the vicinity of where the project will be constructed. And you will want to include how the project will benefit from this project. So the criteria for the project benefits and proposed solutions focuses on the project's community and public benefit. And so you want to be sure to include and indicate a clearly defined, well-developed, comprehensive, and deliverable solution, as well as economic competitiveness, how the project promotes community connectivity or can improve public health and safety, how the project improves system efficiency, accessibility, modal connections. For example, you could show how it reduces the potential for crashes, providing how it can provide new modal connections, improves awareness of modal options through education and outreach, if it is in fact a safe route to school project. And as I alluded to before, you have to provide documented public and community support. These can include a letter of support, resolution, or other actions or support by groups or government entities that demonstrate support for the proposed project, and they are to be attached to the application. So you want to explain how the work is technically feasible and is able to be implemented. You should include that the project brings the area into compliance with ADA, all the ADA requirements. So under the next category, which is innovation and creativity, what we're going to be looking at and what you should be focusing on is, did the project use an innovative approach to arrive at a solution, such as innovative partnering, connecting sidewalks to form a network, and connecting to other modes, making it multimodal. Another aspect could be using unique construction techniques or materials such as permeable pavements or the use of natural drainage solutions. Another thing could be a unique or efficient delivery method, such as using a county to deliver a town project. And also another key thing that could help your application would be if the project leverages other partnerships or fund sources. For example, if you're providing greater than the 20% match, or if public-private partnerships are made, or you're leveraging other grant sources, or that partner participation that was being discussed. And then lastly, for safety improvement, improving safety, the project is a high priority for a community, which will help reduce crashes, personal injuries, fatalities, and or address a high accident location. Next slide, please. Okay, so moving on with the evaluation criteria, we have project alignment. In general, this focuses on the relationship of the project to transportation and the TAP or CMAQ program objectives. The reviewers will be looking to see if the project is referenced in a regional, state, or local plan, such as a long-range comprehensive master plan, a corridor plan, a scenic byway plan, a ADA transition plan, a metropolitan planning organization plan, a regional economic development council, if it's mentioned by an REDC, New York State bicycle routes, smart growth or complete street plans. And if any of those are the case, you would want to identify the plan or the plans in the project application. And you should also show how the project demonstrates a relationship to surface transportation and makes connections to the built environment by creating connections between trails, sidewalks to transit, community centers or school. And you would want to show how the project enhances the trip experience, improves safety, connectivity, or user access. So like I said, I'll say it again, you want to make sure that it complies with the American with Disabilities Act. The project should expand upon travel choices or improve access for the traveling public, and the project meets the intended program purpose, that is for transportation and not for recreation. And most importantly, for CMAQ only, there is an additional need to demonstrate the air quality benefits, which you see on the screen, which is the congestion reduction mitigation and the emissions reduction. So next slide, please. Okay, so the essential project management elements, which include the schedule, budget, and deliverability of the project account for 60% of the total score for both TAP and CMAQ. So you want to make sure to include all project phases and activities in the scope, schedule, and budget. The criteria considered include the project schedule, the budget, the status of the right-of-way, the ability to initiate the funds, the match assurance, and the ability to deliver the project. The submission of project deliverables documentation allows for a better assessment of the current status of the project. So when we're looking at the project schedule, for example, you have to make sure that the schedule is realistic in relation to different regulatory reviews such as NEPA, SECRA, SHPO, right-of-way approvals, any possible utility relocations, design approval, advertisement, letting, and construction. The schedule should include all project phases, activities, and milestones, including preliminary design, final design, consultant selection, right-of-way acquisition, construction, and construction inspection. And as was mentioned earlier, the schedule and considerations should include time to execute a state and local agreement with NISDOT, a consultant selection, utility coordination relocations, materials testings, advertising, and letting. And most importantly, the schedule should demonstrate that the project will be ready to be implemented, including fully executing a state-local agreement. The project must move to construction letting within 24 months, and it should reflect project activities within the schedule. And the project should be completed within 30 months of commencing construction. Moving on to the project budget, it should reflect all costs associated with advancing the project in compliance with all state and federal requirements. The estimates should be verifiable in relation to the scope and schedule proposed for completion, and it must reflect and identify all costs associated with the project scope, which include design, right-of-way incidentals and acquisition, any consultant services, regulatory reviews and permits, construction and construction inspection. For right-of-way, we need to identify the status of the right-of-way for the proposed project. That is, if the land is owned, leased, or does it need to be required. And you can provide that proof of ownership through surveys, highway record plans, or clearance certificates. And I'll say this just so not to cause any confusion. Tax maps are not sufficient property boundary line documentation. If right-of-way acquisition, whether through purchase or lease, is required, be sure to identify the number of parcels, the type of acquisition, whether it's purchase or lease, and if it's temporary or permanent. Right-of-way costs include physical inspection of the proposed acquisitions, title searches, certification of property interest, appraisal and appraisal review activities, mapping, surveys, and the cost of property purchase. You would need to identify any railroad right-of-way involved with the project, identify any potential utility conflicts, and be sure to reflect all right-of-way activities in the project schedule and budget. And lastly, under match assurance and ability to deliver the project, as I was stating in the previous slide, the sponsor will first instance and provide the 20% project match. This is assured by a resolution or letter of intent. The sponsor should demonstrate responsibility for all aspects of the approved project, including constructed facility, future maintenance, and operation. The proposed work should be technically feasible and implementable, and we are going to be looking at demonstrative effectiveness in using federal aid funds and delivering federal aid projects within the last 5 years. So the sponsor's previous performance utilizing awarded federal transportation funds, as I was saying, is taken into consideration. Undertaking and completing federal aid projects on schedule, within budget, and in accordance with program rules and regulations will be considered. Allowances may be made for a sponsor's past poor performance on a previous federal aid project when the performance was due to circumstances beyond its control, or where the sponsor can demonstrate that it has either corrected policies, procedures, and staffing that were deemed to have resulted in the poor performance, and show successful completion of projects since that time. And as was stated earlier, we highly recommend participation in that application pre-review. Thank you for your time. I will now turn it over to Margaret.
Thank you, Stephen. And just a reminder, if you've got questions, to please be sure to put those in the chat box. I know a lot of you have been submitting some really good questions. Lynn is working hard to keep up with those questions. She's going to try to answer some in the chat. Some of them we might need to take back to do some additional research on, and we'll add those to our FAQs that are posted on our website. but we'll also have a little time at the end of our presentation to go over some of those questions as well. So to the extent that we can, we'll try to get some of those answers right into the chat box and out to you. So for the next slides, we're going to talk a little bit more about applying for funding, and we're going to cover the application pre-review process and just some general information on the application itself. So some general considerations to take into account if you're going to be applying for this funding. I think we've already mentioned this, but applications must be submitted through the Grants Gateway, and at the end of the presentation, we'll provide a link to the Grants Gateway resources, and of course, the second half of the presentation will be Grants Gateway staff going through some more of the technical parts of the process. So to be considered for either TAP or CMAQ funding, all requirements for that specific program must be met. It's possible to apply for funding under both TAP and CMAQ programs, in which case the project must meet both sets of eligibility criteria. A project application submitted for both programs will be evaluated twice, once against each set of program criteria and ranked accordingly per each program. Only one project per application submitted. So multiple applications for multiple projects could be submitted, but just one project per application, and we have a maximum of 2 awards that can be made per sponsor. Some general application tips that we'd like to share with you before moving on to the specifics of the pre-review process and application. We really recommend that you become familiar with the 2021 TAP CMAQ Program Guidebook and associated application instructions. We suggest that you print out the application instructions, also known as Appendix E, and use this to follow along and fill out the application. We've written those in a step-by-step process, and they will be incredibly helpful to you as you go through the application. And before you get started in entering in the information in the application, we recommend that you're going to want to gather all of the information necessary that's going to be required to complete the application. So you're going to need to collect things such as a detailed project description and all related information about that project. You're going to want to have handy specific and detailed project budget and funding source information. You'll need right-of-way documentation if it's applicable. You're also going to need to have any data necessary to determine emissions reduction for CMAQ projects. You'll want to be able to provide information regarding the expected benefits to the public interest, and you'll want to have documentation of community support, such as an entity resolution or letters for community members. Additionally, you may wish to have a signed letter from a PE. Again, that's an optional thing that you can include in your application, but it will provide you with bonus points in your application if you do include that. You'll also need a project location map. So another important thing to be thinking of is to becoming familiar with the Grants Gateway and who has what roles in your organization and how to log in. Again, we'll hear more about that at the, after this presentation, after the break, but it's a really important part of the process that you're going to want to familiarize yourself with. And the Grants Gateway will assign a number to your application once you save it in the system. So you're going to want to be sure to note this somewhere. So that's really how we're going to reference your application going forward. For lengthy entries in the application, we suggest that you type it out in a Word document and cut and paste it. It'll make it a lot easier for you. And of course, we always recommend to save often so you don't have lost work. One thing that we really stress to applicants applying for funding is that we'd like you to take part in the application pre-review process. The reviewers really provide helpful information and feedback to help you to complete your application. And just another note that the contract signatory, the grantee contract signatory or grantee system administrator is the individual that must submit the application by the deadline with all supporting documentation uploaded. And you're going to want to also save and print your application for your records. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the application pre-review process. As I mentioned, it is strongly encouraged that you participate in this process. In order for DOT to access your application to do the pre-review, we'll need the application number. The pre-review is to review information that you've completed in your application to date. The review will provide written feedback on key application components, such as scope and benefits, the budget, the schedule, delivery, and right-of-way assurance. Just to point out that we will only be able to review what you've completed in your application within Grants Gateway at the time of review. So you're going to be able to continue to work on your application after you submit the request for the pre-review. However, the comments that we provide back to you will be based on what's available at the time the review is completed. The pre-review feedback from DOT will be provided via a TAP CMAQ pre-review comment form that will be emailed back to the applicant at the email address provided in the request. For the potential of getting additional bonus points added to the application, the TAP CMAQ pre-review comment form must be uploaded to the Grants Gateway with your application when it is submitted. Remember, this process is not a substitute for the actual application submission. Sponsors must complete the program application and submit it through the Grants Gateway no later than Wednesday, September 29th, along with all required documentation in order to be considered for funding. So the deadline to participate in the application pre-review process is Tuesday, August 17th. That's the date that you'll need to submit the form requesting your pre-review to DOT by. In order to request a pre-review, you're going to go to the TAP CMAQ website, and there you can find the pre-review request form. You fill out the request and email it to the TAP CMAQ email box, and this will trigger a pre-review of the application. When the application pre-review is received, the regional coordinator and appropriate DOT staff will provide feedback on the project scope, budget, and delivery. Again, this is a repeat, but just to remind you that DOT will only be able to review what you've completed in your application within Grants Gateway at the time of the review. So we really encourage you to complete the application really to the best of your ability so that you're going to be able to get the most feedback and benefit from that pre-review so that you can have a successful application. Pre-review feedback will be provided on the pre-review comment form that'll be emailed back to you. And again, to get those additional bonus points, you're going to have to remember to upload that TAP CMAQ pre-review comment form with your application when you submit it. We expect that the pre-review comment form will be emailed back to applicants that request the pre-review on or around Tuesday, August 31st. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the application and the instructions and worksheets that can be found in Grants Gateway. And just to let you know, before you can use Grants Gateway, you'll need to be registered in the Grants Gateway and have an SFS vendor ID. Registration in Grants Gateway is required for any entity applying for or receiving state grant funds. For Grants Gateway login or technical questions, applicants can contact Grants Gateway, and their contact information is at the end of this presentation. Okay, so here we have a screenshot of the first couple of what are called program-specific questions of the application that you're going to see when you log in. Again, we'll remind you that detailed instructions on how to complete the application can be found in Appendix E of the guidebook. So again, they're really easy to follow, step-by-step instructions that'll get you through the application. One reminder that we'd really like to stress and point out that you don't wait to the last minute to identify who your grantee contract signatory or grantee system administrator is. While there are other Grants Gateway roles within an organization that may start an application, the application may actually only be submitted by the authorized contract signatory or system administrator. So it's very important that you identify who those folks are, because they are the ones that have to submit the application. Additional Grants Gateway info is available by going to the TAP CMAQ webpage for information, or by going to the Grants Gateway site. Just to note that the Grants Gateway Help Desk is available from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the application documents that you're going to need to complete your application. These include a detailed project budget estimate, a budget summary worksheet, detailed project schedule, documentation of community support, verification of match assurance and the ability to first instance project costs, a project map, a right-of-way worksheet and documentation, which is mandatory for any projects involving right-of-way, and a CMAQ technical benefits worksheet, which is mandatory for all CMAQ projects. You may also need to include NEPA and seeker information, plans and drawings, a PE letter for project review if you choose to include one, and the DOT pre-review comment form if you elected to participate in the pre-review process. Some of these documents you'll need to supply, and others are provided for you in the Grants Gateway. And here's some additional information on the templates and forms that are available to you. These are just helpful checklists and required forms, which are provided on our website or the guidebook. The bolded items on the screen are provided for you as a template in the Grants Gateway. So the application checklist, this is a really helpful list of what needs to be done prior, during, and just before submitting your application, and can be found in the Appendix E application instructions. We strongly encourage you to refer to this before submitting your application. It'll help make sure that you've covered everything you need to with your application. There's also the application pre-review request form that we discussed. So if you do want to request a pre-review, you must complete and submit this form. And then we have the application pre-review comment form. This is the feedback that you would receive if you participate in the pre-review that you would need to include with your application. There's also the budget summary worksheet. This is a required worksheet and is provided to you in the Grants Gateway. It must be included with your application submission. There's also a right-of-way worksheet. This also is a template available in Grants Gateway, and if you have right-of-way related to your project, then you must include it with your application submission as well. The CMAQ Technical Benefits Worksheet is a required worksheet for all CMAQ projects and is also provided to you in the Grants Gateway. Again, it must be included with your application if it's a CMAQ project. We also provide for reference a sample PE letter. This is just a sample letter a licensed engineer will use if the sponsor chooses to have an engineer complete a quality assurance review of their project. And you'll want to include this with the application submission to receive bonus points. And now we're going to look at a few more of these forms in more detail.
Thank you, Margaret. A very important worksheet is the budget summary worksheet. You will need to first download this worksheet and save it to your computer. You complete the worksheet using the information from your detailed project estimate. Information in this worksheet will also be needed to complete other portions of the application in Grants Gateway. Applicants can find the budget summary worksheet within the Gateway or on the TAP CMAQ website. Specifically, Appendix E, the application instructions, include complete and detailed instructions on how to complete this form. So let's talk a little bit more about how to complete the form and the information contained. You want to identify the anticipated costs for each project phase. As you fill in the top left table, the bottom table will perform calculations. The lower table will then provide a range of costs that the New York State Department of Transportation would expect for this project type. If the value you entered is not within the range, the text will turn red, indicating you may want to look at this particular budget item. For example, typically construction inspection cost is between 12 and 15% of the total construction cost of smaller projects, those under $1 million. Reviewers are looking for these types of things during their recommended application pre-review. Note the two cells highlighted in yellow in the upper left box. For construction projects, include an 8% contingency. This number is based totally on the construction cost of the project. You need to make sure that you have the appropriate 20% qualifying match. TAP CMAQ funding can reimburse up to 80% of the eligible project costs. You must be prepared to first instance fund, meaning that you pay the 100% cost, get reimbursed by DOT. Also, please include all sources of any additional funds. If you're receiving funds from any other entities, and also if you believe that those funds would be eligible to be used as match. For example, CHIPS, Extreme Winter Recovery, and Pave New York could be used as matching funds. And please note that right-of-way costs may account for no more than 15% of the funding awarded and must meet all requirements under the Uniform Act. Here we show a completed budget summary worksheet. Those areas where potential funding problems may become apparent jump out to sponsors and reviewers. You should be able to explain any huge differences from the norm expected and the values indicated on the lower table. In this example, the input value for preliminary engineering is much lower than the calculated low number and would raise a flag and cause comment to be provided on a pre-review. It also means that the applicant should take a look and make sure that the appropriate amount of funding has been indicated for preliminary design. Another important item, as Stephen discussed, is the project schedule. There is no specific format for the project schedule, but you must upload your proposed project schedule as part of the final application. Questions in the application will let you indicate where you are in the project development process. This schedule provides additional detail for the reviewers. Projects must go to construction letting within 24 months of the execution of a state-local agreement. This should be clearly reflected in the schedule. The further along a sponsor is in a project, the greater chance to meet the schedule. Wherever you are in the schedule, a state-local agreement will be needed to be processed prior to reimbursement of any eligible costs. If you have any additional project documentation, such as seeker, NEPA, or design approval documentation, you should upload this documentation as well as part of your Grant Gateway application. You need to make sure that your schedule reflects all your project phases, which includes design, right-of-way, and construction. Design consists of separate and distinct phases, preliminary design and detailed design, as noted on the budget summary worksheet. The goal of design is to perform all environmental assessments required and obtain a design approval document. Design approval document will include a detailed project location, scope of the work of the project, cost, funding, and scheduling. It should give a clear and concise description of the various alternatives, as well as the determination of the preferred alternative with justification. It should cover all the environmental requirements, including Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, Essential Fish Habitat, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act, and Section 4F, Park and Recreation Lands. It should also document any public information meetings, and if right-of-way involved, document the property impacted by the project and whether it will need to be acquired. For right-of-way there are two phases. There's the incidental phase and the acquisition phase. All phases must conform to the Federal Uniform Act and the New York State Eminent Domain Procedure Law. The last phase of the project will be construction. Construction includes the preparation of contract bid documents for letting and the advertisement, the letting and award of the project. Also, don't forget, if needed, select a consultant to perform your construction inspection services. So how do we want to convey the information that you have about right-of-way documentation? We've provided a worksheet for you. So if your project needs right-of-way, you'll need to download this form, complete and upload this form in Grants Gateway. You'll need to identify whether the property will need to be acquired, leased, or obtain an easement. Provide the name of the property owner or lessee. If a lease or contract are in place, what are the terms in years? When would the lease or contract expire? And provide some details of the acquisition, easement, or lease. Is the property on DEC land or National Historic land, or owned or leased by a utility company? This form provides important information for the reviewer to understand what right-of-way is required and where you are in the right-of-way process. Another important form for CMAQ projects only is the CMAQ Technical Benefits Worksheet. All CMAQ applicants must complete the CMAQ Technical Benefits Worksheet. The project category selection will determine which table will need to be completed. See the application instructions for more detail. This slide shows all the tables for your information only. Typical information needed for DOT to determine the emissions benefits include the number of motor vehicles affected by the project before and after project completion, vehicle miles traveled before and after the project, vehicle traffic average speed before and after the project. For clean vehicle and retrofit projects, the type of vehicles affected by the project, their average operating speed and miles traveled before and after implementation of the project. The applicant is responsible for estimating the project effect on vehicle volumes, speeds, and other activity data. The estimated effects must be credible and based on a reproducible and logical analytical procedure. The applicant needs to explain and document the methods, models, or studies used to obtain the numbers reported in the charts. DOT cannot estimate the effect of your project on volume, speeds, etc. in the application. It is up to the applicant to estimate these effects. We also recommend that sponsors refrain from exaggerating benefits in any attempt to improve the project score. For example, we would not expect the construction of a sidewalk to shift 10% of a single occupancy vehicle traffic to pedestrian mode. Be reasonable and estimate project benefits based on reasonable professional judgment and appropriate traffic models. Specific data requirements, the project selection process, and CMAQ project rating criteria are found in the guidebook in Appendix C. So after the application is submitted, the application cannot be altered. Be sure to print out a copy of the application for your records. And please note the application number in case you have any questions or follow-up with DOT. A few more sponsor responsibilities. Once a project is been selected and awarded, the sponsor will be responsible for procuring a consultant if needed. If a consultant is procured, the sponsor is responsible for oversight of the project design and following all the appropriate environmental laws, including the State Environmental Quality Review Act. The sponsor is responsible for granting design approval unless otherwise noted in the project development manual matrix. The sponsor is responsible for acquiring all of the right-of-way necessary for the project. The sponsor will advance project to construction, including advertisement, award, and administration of the construction contract. Regardless if the work is performed by a contractor or the sponsor's workforces, proper oversight is required. And the responsibility of project closeout is also that of the sponsor. And then upon the conclusion of construction contract work, the sponsor will accept the work and provide the proper documentation. It is the sponsor's responsibility to operate and maintain the project upon completion. Details on all of these activities may be found in the local projects manual. So the use of consultants is a frequent topic and many frequently asked questions that we receive. So we're going to cover a few details on these. A sponsor may wish to procure a consultant to perform various tasks, one of which is the preparation of the application. You need to make sure that all of the selection of consultants and application preparation comply with the federal requirements in Chapter 6 of the Local Projects Manual. All consultants must be selected through a competitive, qualifications-based selection process. You may use an existing selection process as long as it has been executed within the last 3 years. Sponsors may use existing procurement procedures if those procedures meet state and federal procurement requirements. Consultants are only eligible to work on the phases named in the request for proposals and solicitations. So I'm going to say that again. This is an important item, and we frequently get questions on this. Consultants can only work on the eligible work phases included in the advertisement. So if the advertisement included application, design, and/or construction, inspection, and support, they may work on all phases. If you only hired them to work on one phase, they can only work on that phase, and you would have to procure a consultant for other phases. So please be clear and articulate the phases you want included in a specific solicitation. Please contact your ROPL to inquire if your consultant selection process meets federal and state requirements if you are not sure. There are a number of federal aid requirements, however not previously covered, that we'll mention at this time. One is civil rights compliance. You need to make sure that all projects comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And also, these are federal programs, and they must also comply with all disadvantaged business enterprise requirements. They must comply with all environmental documentation requirements, including the National Environmental Policy Act and the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Also, the sponsor is responsible for maintaining the facility for the life of the project, making repairs, performing snow and ice removal, maintain ownership, and provide public access for the capital project. And just a reminder that this is a reimbursement program. Once the sponsor receives authorization to proceed, the sponsor may procure a consultant or a contractor to perform the work that is needed to implement the project. Upon receipt of an invoice from the consultant or contractor, the sponsor pays the consultant or contractor for their completed work. Then the sponsor submits a payment request to New York State Department of Transportation. We then reimburse the sponsor for all eligible costs at 80% of the eligible costs. So at this time, I will note there are some recent procedure changes in reimbursement. DOT is now using the statewide financial system, and some of your reimbursement procedures have changed. So if you haven't performed or progressed a federal aid project recently or requested reimbursements from DOT, please check with your ROPOs, determine if there are any new procedures that you need to be made aware of. Many of the items that we have discussed today can be found in the local projects manual. The manual includes quick references, brief descriptions of each of the chapters so you can find the information that you're looking for. You can also perform keyword searches, and provided links to other guidance in other locations of the department's website, such as civil rights compliance, ADA guidance, NEPA, seeker, and additional right-of-way information. You can find the local projects manual at the link at the bottom of this slide. And as always, your regional local project liaison is available to provide support to the applicant. They make sure that all projects comply with all federal and state rules and regulations. And the ROPL has open and regular communications with each sponsor. They provide guidance and they remain involved and updated with the project status throughout a project's life cycle. There are a few key resources available to applicants. One is the TAP CMAQ webpage. On that webpage is the guidebook and associated appendices. Many of those appendices have been mentioned here today. We recommend that you go to the website and become familiar with the items available. There's also a list of key program dates. I would recommend that you print that out, put it in a prominent location so that you are aware of submission deadlines. Today's slides have been posted on the website so that you may go back and refer to them at a later date. There are also estimating resources there and a list of our regional local project liaisons to assist you. The Federal Highway Administration also has resources that may be helpful to you. The first item here are the Federal Aid Essentials for Local Public Agencies. These are 5 to 7 minute videos on subjects that you may be interested in. You can zero in on a particular topic and watch that video. There's also a link to a website to provide additional information for local public agencies. And just a reminder of a few dates. We recommend you start your application as soon as you can. And if you would like a pre-review of your application, you must submit the request to the TAP CMAQ mailbox by Tuesday, August 17th, 2021. And the final application deadline is Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. Again, the deadline is 5 p.m. on Wednesday, and the system will automatically shut down. Please do not wait till the last minute to submit your application, and make sure you know who your approver is and who needs to submit that application on your behalf. So, a few takeaways from today. A few of the things that we want to make sure that the sponsor understands is that they must demonstrate the fiscal capacity to complete the project, including the 20% sponsor match, and they're responsible for future operation and maintenance costs. Provide documentation authorizing access for the right-of-way required to advance the project. Provide a verifiable and realistic schedule and budget that includes all the costs and all the phases for the project to progress. Bring a project to letting or implementation within 24 months of the execution of the state-local agreement. Need to clearly document and submit community support for the project. This can be done through letters, statements, resolutions that demonstrate community support for your project. Stephen covered this in great detail. Secure additional points for your PE review and application pre-review, and submit all your applications through Grants Gateway. Also, only one project per application. So with that, we're going to go to the chat, and Lynn is going to assist me. I believe she will read the questions, and what we will do is, if we can answer the question, we'll give an answer today. If it's a question that needs further research, we will post it on the website under our frequently asked questions. And then, if you're lucky, Lynn was able to type some answers in the chat box in response to some of those. So with that, Lynn, could you give us the first question that is in the chat box?
Yes, there was a question on the project eligibility slide under relate to surface transportation. Says the sole or primary purpose cannot be recreational. However, the eligible project categories for TAP include planning, design, and construction of off-road trail facilities for pedestrians, bicyclists, and non-motorized transportation users. Is that not primarily recreational in nature? How do you define recreational?
So while that is primarily recreational, it does have logical termini. You are trying to connect generators of pedestrians or bicyclists. We're not looking for, say, a closed-loop recreational facility that is not connected in some way, shape, or form to a transportation need.
Okay.
That's our next question, Lynn.
Regarding one of the new changes for this year, how will priority be given to projects in disadvantaged communities? Is that part of the evaluation community, and is there a list of the communities considered to be disadvantaged?
At this time, we will refer to New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's mapping on disadvantaged communities in New York State. So at the time of award, we will use the listing on that website. So if you want to refer to that, that will identify those communities. This will be a secondary criteria. So each of the applications will be scored numerically, and then we will look to see if the communities around the state have projects in those communities. And if they have not, then that gives us the ability to recommend a project in a disadvantaged community if a project has not scored high enough to be selected in that community. What's our next question?
Does the PE signature or letter need to be an outside independent engineer, or can it be from an internal PE from the sponsor?
I am going to say that that one will be answered through an FAQ. I want to be consistent with how we've responded in the past. So look to our FAQs for that one. Next question, Lynn.
All right. How many total projects can be awarded to a single sponsor? I believe we said no more than 2.
The maximum award per sponsor is 2. You may submit as many applications as you would like, but each sponsor will be awarded a maximum of 2.
All right, those are the questions other than the one that we did answer. We're seeking clarification on what needs to be matched. So for the $500,000 minimum for this for this solicitation and clarifying that the 20% match needs to be on the total project cost.
Yes, it is a total project cost. We also received 2 more questions that came in outside of the everyone chat box. So Margaret's going to give those to us now.
Yep, it looks like we have another one. The question is, how important is it to demonstrate project consistency with the state's Public Infrastructure Policy Act?
I'm going to say I will respond to that through the frequently asked questions, because I believe we should do a little more research and make sure that we clearly articulate the relationship. Do you have another question, Margaret?
I do have another one here. Could you please clarify the need for sponsors to have an ADA transition plan in order to apply?
You do not need an ADA transition plan to apply. However, to receive federal funds, you need to have an ADA transition plan in the works and how you're going to meet your ADA needs.
Yeah.
And we can reiterate that. All of the
We will
questions
address that.
today will be reiterated in our frequently asked questions, because we'll make sure that these are written down and the answers are put out for others who may not be on today's webinar. So all of these questions will be answered and repeated on the website. So that's a reminder. You should go back and check the website frequently. We have a series of questions that have come in this week, and we'll post responses. We will try to post them at the end of each week, the questions that have come in. So check back on Friday afternoons or Monday morning to see the new questions and answers that have been posted to the website. Do we have any other questions coming in?
There is another one here. If we decide that we are not yet ready to apply for this round, when will the next opportunity be to apply for TAP CMAQ?
So while we have been, our goal has been to issue funding rounds every 2 years. We were able to issue a funding round in 2014, one in 2016, 2018. This one's a little bit behind. We would try to go on a similar schedule, but it's also based on funding available through the federal government. And at this time, we don't have a long-term bill for funding. But as long as there's a long-term bill for funding, we would try to come out in 2 years again. Do we have any other questions?
I don't believe so, unless anyone would like to type anything into the chat at this time.
Okay. Well,
Oh, wait.
There's a question here, if multiple municipalities partner on a project, do all municipalities need to participate in a webinar?
whoever is going to be the project sponsor and have an agreement executed between the department and that municipality needs to attend. So let's cover attendance today. For those folks who registered ahead of time, we have your name and your email address, and we need to confirm attendance today. There is a question on the application on what day did you attend the webinar. It's important for you to note what day you attended and enter that in the application and who attended. If you signed in today and you only have a phone number and we don't know who you are, I would recommend that you type your name in the chat box and make it clear to us that you attended, because we can't see the names when you're just a phone number. We want to make sure that we give you credit for attending today. So many of you have already done that. If any of you have not typed your name in, then we'd like you to do that now. We are taking screenshots of all of the questions and all of the names that we see so that we can give you credit for attending today.
A couple more have come in, Diane.
Yep.
Can a town use state highway funds as part of the 20% funding?
I'm gonna say I'm gonna have to
Answer that
research
one.
that one, and we'll put that in the chat box. There is a frequently asked question about eligible matching sources out there. I just don't remember if that one is already in that frequently asked question. Do you have another question?
There is just a question about the pre-review is 30 days away, and that's a quick turnaround for those who want to hire a consultant to assist with the application. So it's more of a question about how the date was established for the pre-review.
The pre-review is based on having enough time for the applicants to begin the application, for the regions to review, and then having enough time for the sponsor to reflect that in the application.
And we will evaluate based on whatever information is available at the time
Right.
of the pre-review. So continue to work on your application, even if pre-review is requested.
Correct. We'll give you as much feedback as we can. I would say, most important, try to give a clear description of the project so that we can help you, especially if you're concerned, you're not sure if you're eligible for CMAQ or TAP. Maybe you want some assistance making sure you chose the right category, things like that. Good description of the project, a rough schedule of when you think you can deliver, high-level costs, anything that would help us give you feedback on if you're on the right track or not, and if there's anything we think is missing that would help improve your application. All right, any other questions?
Any more, Donna?
Okay, so with that,
Did you
I
have?
would like to thank everyone for attending today. We greatly appreciate your time. And now, we're going to take a 15-minute break.
And just to note, if you did put a question in the chat that we didn't get to, we'll also scroll through the chat to see if we missed anything, and we'll address that in the FAQ.